On the night of December 31st, in the year 406 AD, the final hours of the old Gregorian year, a profound silence enveloped the borderlands of the mighty Roman Empire. The frozen waters of the Rhine River, normally bustling with ships and commerce, lay immobilized under an unprecedented winter freeze, its surface hardened into a broad, icy barrier. Amidst the bleak and oppressive fog, a dense, milky haze clung to the barren branches of stripped trees and the jagged ice floes, shrouding the landscape in an almost surreal, dreamlike veil. In that shrouded scene, faint and difficult to grasp, there appeared the outlines of something utterly unimaginable, something that defied the very boundaries of human comprehension. It was not a typical army advancing for war, it was an entire people, a vast migrating mass that had finally shifted from its place, ready to embark on an uncertain journey. Tens of thousands of souls, bound by desperation and clutching their last shreds of hope, moved with an almost ghostly determination. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, charged with an electric tension that seemed oppressive, heavy as though the very air carried the weight of impending catastrophe, a catastrophe of universal proportions. No one, neither the weary barbarians on the eastern shore nor the freezing Roman legionaries in their battered armor, could foresee that this very night, the threads of fate would intertwine in a knot that would irrevocably alter the course of history itself. This was the story of the Vandals, whose name in centuries to come would become synonymous with senseless destruction. Yet, on this icy December night, they were merely a fleeing tribe, fleeing from the horror that had engulfed their homeland. Behind them, in the east, a voracious fire of the Hunnic invasion blazed with destructive fury, a relentless force annihilating entire civilizations, reducing thriving cities to ashes and leaving nothing but ruin in its wake. Ahead of them stretched a mirage and empire, majestic yet visibly weakened Rome, soaked in wealth and decay, teetering on the edge of collapse. For these nomadic peoples, the frozen Rhine was not an obstacle but a bridge, either a pathway into a new life or a gateway to swift death. That night, beneath a sky cloaked in clouds and indifferent to human struggles, tens of thousands of men, women, and children stepped onto the icy surface. The sound of thousands of carts creaking over the frozen crust merged with the cries of infants, prayers whispered in forgotten languages, and the muffled commands of tribal leaders giving instructions in hushed yet urgent tones. All these sounds wove together into a vast, singular hum, an echo of the Great Migration, a symphony shaped by desperation, hope, and the relentless march of history. Their purpose was not conquest but survival. They were fleeing chaos, seeking refuge from an apocalypse burgeoning behind them. Yet, this seemingly desperate crossing of the icy river marked only the beginning of a long, bloody odyssey, a journey that would carry them through blooming provinces of Gaul, across towering mountain passes in Spain, and finally into the deadly waters of Gibraltar, storming toward the very heart of Roman power in Africa's richest province. In Africa, amid the ancient city ruins of Carthage, these northern invaders, arising from the depths of forests and marshlands, would accomplish what had once seemed unthinkable. They would forge their own kingdom, seizing the grain basket of Rome itself, forcing the eternal city into submission. As a land-bound people, they would build a formidable navy, transforming from foot soldiers into maritime marauders whose presence would dominate the Mediterranean's waters. Their king, Gaiseric, crippled in body yet driven by a ruthless genius, would etch his name into history as one of Rome's greatest enemies. This narrative recounts the forgotten empire of the Vandals, unfolding as a paradoxical tale of origins and downfall. Ironically, the Germanic kingdom was born not on the familiar plains of Europe but in the distant sands and forests of Africa. It is a saga of desperate refugees turned ruthless pirates, heretics who challenged the Orthodox Church, and an empire that appeared invincible but swiftly crumbled, leaving behind nothing but a cursed name and a few lines etched into the annals of victorious chroniclers. We accompany them on every step, beginning from the icy river's edge, through the blazing sands of Numidia, to the plundered ruins of Rome itself, culminating in the triumphant return of the Byzantine general Belisarius into the reconquered city of Carthage. This is a story about birth, rise, and collapse, a saga of a world brave enough to defy eternity itself. It all began on that foggy, cold night, on a frozen river, which became the tangible boundary between one epoch and another, marking the dawn of a new age forged amid ice and shadows. While the bustling cities of the Roman Empire spun their webs of intrigue and the noble elite indulged in luxury and decadence, a different world persisted in the dense forests north of the Danube. It was there, beyond the reach of civilized civilization, that a people dwelled whose destiny had yet to be written. They were known as the Vandals. Yet, long before this name became a symbol of destruction and chaos, They belonged to proud tribes whose history stretched back into the mists of ancient times, into the cold waters of Scandinavia and the legendary tales of gods and heroes. Their journey toward power was neither short nor straightforward. It was marked by a tumultuous path through countless wars, bloodshed, and fiery conflicts. The origins of the Vandals, much like many other Germanic tribes of that era, remain shrouded in mystery. Writers of antiquity, such as Pliny the Elder and Tacitus, mention them as one of the major groups among the Germans, alongside the Goths and Burgundians. Modern archaeological research links their roots to the pre-wars culture, which flourished in the territories that now encompass Poland and Ukraine. These were not the primitive savages in animal pelts as Roman propagandists liked to portray them, rather, they were skilled metalworkers. Their warriors donned fine iron armor and wielded long swords. They were engaged in agriculture and cattle breeding, leading sedentary lives, yet their societal structure was deeply militarized. Power was concentrated in the hands of military chieftains, whose chief virtues were luck in battle and generosity in distributing the spoils of war. By the beginning of what we now call the 5th century AD, the Vandals started a slow, inexorable movement southward, driven not only by their own ambitions but also pushed by the encroaching pressure of other tribes and, increasingly, by rumors of the wealth accumulated within the Roman Empire. They divided into two main branches, closely related yet independent: the Silingi, who settled in Cilicia, and the Alans, who advanced toward the borders of Dacia. It was the Alans, or the Attings, who would later play a pivotal role in the unfolding events of this turbulent period. Their initial encounters with Rome mirrored the complex dance of diplomacy, warfare, and shifting alliances characteristic of late antiquity. Sometimes, the Vandals launched fierce raids into Roman provinces; other times, they served as federates, allies tasked with defending the empire's frontiers in exchange for gold, provisions, and land. Emperor Marcus Aurelius waged wars against them during his tumultuous reign. Later, Emperor Constantine the Great resettled some of them in Pannonia, attempting to turn these enemies into a frontier guard-like force. Over the course of 2 centuries, the Vandals, a fierce and enterprising people, became an integral part of the intricate, ever-changing tapestry of the Roman borderlands. During this period, they learned from the Romans in tactics, adopted certain cultural elements, but never relinquished their identity, language, or religion. Similar to the Goths, the Vandals embraced Christianity, but in its Arian form. Named after the Christian theologian Arius from Alexandria, Arianism taught that Christ was not equal to God the Father but was instead his highest creation. This doctrine was considered heretical by the Orthodox Nicene Church, which affirmed the full divinity of Christ and the doctrine of the Trinity. For the Nicene Christians, Arianism was a dangerous heresy. For the Vandals, it became a defining aspect of their identity and would serve later as an ideological tool for justifying brutal persecutions of their subjects. By the end of the 2nd century AD, the fragile balance along the frontier had shattered entirely. From the east, the vast steppes of Asia sent forth a new, unprecedented threat: the Huns. Their arrival marked the beginning of a new chapter of chaos and upheaval, forever altering the course of history. What unfolded was far more than just another wave of barbarian invasions. It was an unstoppable force driven by the mighty Huns, a military machine capable of obliterating everything in its path. Their sudden appearance set off a domino effect across the unaware landscape. In a desperate bid to escape this relentless threat, the Goths crossed the Danube River, and by the year 378, they inflicted a crushing defeat upon the Roman armies at Adrianople. This catastrophic blow sent shockwaves through the Roman world, triggering the movement of entire peoples, who broke free from their ancestral lands, fleeing westward in search of safety and new opportunities. Among these fleeing peoples were the Vandals and the Isdingians, who lived in the region of Pannonia. For them, living close to the Hun menace became a matter of life and death. Driven by the mortal danger that hung over their heads, they united with remnants of other tribes, the Vevs and part of the Sarmatian Alans, tribes of Iranian origin famed for their heavy cavalry, forming a conglomerate of desperate peoples. This coalition, bound by a common fate and fear, pressed forward into the west, heading toward the last natural barrier, the Rhine River. At this moment, the Roman Empire was at its most fragile state in history. Following the death of Emperor Theodosius the Great in the year 395, the empire was irrevocably divided into two distinct entities, the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. The western part, governed by the immature and essentially powerless Emperor Galla Placidia, was embroiled in internal strife, political intrigue, and military unrest. Power was no longer concentrated in a central authority but was effectively held by powerful generals, many of whom were of barbarian descent. Among these military leaders, the most prominent was Stilicho. Ironically, Stilicho was a Vandal on his father's side, yet he rose to become one of the last great defenders of the collapsing empire. He was an exceptional strategist and a visionary general, who managed the fragile stability of the Western Roman territories during turbulent times. However, in order to repel the Visigothic king Alaric's invasion into Italy, Stilicho was compelled to withdraw the best Roman legions from the crucial Rhine frontier, leaving the borders vulnerable. This decision severely weakened the defenses, turning the empire's front line into a tenuous barrier. Towards the end of December in the year 406, an immense mass of people, warriors, old men, women, and children carrying all their possessions on makeshift carts, approached the Rhine at the vicinity of Maginot, the modern city of Mainz. Estimates vary dramatically, placing their numbers between 80,000 and 150,000 souls. Nature, showing its unpredictable mercy, provided them with a last-minute breakthrough. An unusually harsh winter had frozen the river with a thick layer of ice, transforming a natural barrier that had once protected Gaul into a literal bridge. During the night of the 31st of December, under a shroud of fog, this desperate multitude began their treacherous crossing. Their movement was not a formal invasion but a frantic flight, a chaotic exodus of an entire people trying to escape imminent death. In that moment, the barbarians crossed the illegal threshold into a world-changing epoch. There was no turning back. Behind them, the Hun horde advanced relentlessly, while ahead of them stretched the rich but now vulnerable and unprepared Roman Empire. The Vandals' odyssey had begun. Once a glittering and peaceful jewel within the Western Roman Empire, Gaul was caught utterly unprepared for such an onslaught. For the Vandals, Swabians, and Alans, this crossing turned into a brutal school of survival, a test of endurance where their fury was sharpened and their identities forged anew. Their passage through the lands was not just a migration but a fiery storm, leaving behind a trail of ash and tears in its wake. Crossing the Rhine, the barbarian horde encountered minimal organized resistance. The few Roman garrisons remaining at the frontier were quickly overwhelmed and shattered. The Franks, who had hitherto served as allies and federates of Rome living on the opposite bank, attempted to halt the advancing invaders but suffered devastating defeat in a fierce, bloody battle. During this confrontation, the king of the Vandals and Asdingians, Godegisel, fell defending his people. Yet, the resilience of the invading force was demonstrated when Godegisel's son and heir, Gunderic, supported by the heavy cavalry of the Alans, managed to turn the tide of the battle and claim victory. This pivotal moment was more than just a military success, it was a symbolic act cementing a brutal alliance forged in blood among the Alans, of Iranian nomadic descent, and the Germanic Vandals. Their alliance, sealed by shared violence and mutual interest, propelled them deeper into Gaul, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their relentless journey across the fallen empire. Their advance was not a carefully planned conquest, it was more like a chaotic surge of an enormous, unruly mass of people driven by a desperate need for sustenance. These migrating groups moved in three primary streams, leaving destruction in their wake wherever they went. The city of Treves, once one of the imperial capitals, fell into their hands and was subsequently razed to the ground in flames. Many other thriving settlements such as Metz, Reims, Amiens, and Arras succumbed to the relentless onslaught, their prosperity turned into ruins. Contemporary Roman chroniclers vividly depict scenes of apocalyptic devastation, with burning villas, crumbling temples, entire populations annihilated, and noble families being led away into slavery. It was amidst the smoky haze of Gaul's widespread fires that the iconic image of the barbarian destroyer, the Vandal, was forged in the minds of many. It is crucial to understand that this destruction was not the result of a deliberate campaign aimed at eradicating culture or heritage, as we might interpret it today. For the barbarian tribes, Roman cities were merely vast warehouses of resources to be plundered. They raided every accessible treasure: gold, silver, foodstuffs, livestock, and slaves. Whatever goods could not be easily carried away was often destroyed in the flames. To Roman aristocrats, accustomed to stability and order, this chaos appeared as an apocalyptic catastrophe. To the Vandals, whose ancestors had lived for centuries amid perennial warfare, such destruction and constant violence were simply part of their natural way of life, an ordinary means of establishing dominance and ensuring survival. So why was it that the Roman Empire failed to halt this relentless march? The answer lay in the paralysis of its central authority. While the Vandals ravaged Gaul, the imperial court in Ravenna, under Emperor Honorius, was preoccupied with internal struggles against usurpers. In Britain and Gaul, a succession of self-proclaimed emperors such as Constantine II emerged, each claiming legitimacy. The only capable military leader capable of organizing a defense, Stilicho, was falsely accused of treachery and executed in the year 408 under the orders of Gonarius, a ruler terrified of his influence. As a result, the empire was devouring itself from within, leaving the barbarian tribes little more than opportunists picking the carcass. Having spent nearly 3 years in Gaul, the war band led by Gunderic turned southward, their new focus set on an appealing target, Spain, a wealthy province that had remained relatively untouched by the chaos of the invasion. In the autumn of the year 409, they crossed the Pyrenees Mountains. Spain, protected by its rugged terrain, had long been regarded as a safe and stable rear base. Yet, its defenses were weak, and the invading tribes encountered little resistance as they spread across the Iberian Peninsula unopposed. Here, they decided to settle and establish themselves. By the year 411, the barbarian groups, comprising Vandals and Alans, had come to an agreement with the local Roman authorities or simply seized control by force, dividing the land among themselves and establishing dominion over the provinces. The Swabian Vandals, known as the Asdingi, occupied the northwestern part of Gaul, while the mighty Alans, whose warriors were considered among the most formidable in the Union, acquired the wealthiest central and southern regions, including Lusitania and the territory of Carthaginian Spain. Meanwhile, the Selling Vandals took root in the southernmost and most fertile province of Boeotia. It seemed as though the odyssey of upheaval was nearing its conclusion. The barbarians had acquired their lands, and the empire finally found relief from their relentless raids. However, this was but a temporary respite. Rome could not accept the loss of Spain, and it possessed the means to reclaim it. Other barbarian groups, most notably the Visigoths, who had sacked Rome in the year 410, began to serve as federates of the empire and were sent to Spain to restore order. This marked the beginning of a grim and brutal intra-barbarian conflict. The Visigoths, now acting on behalf of the empire, launched attacks against the Siling Vandals and Alans. By the year 418, the Siling Vandals had been almost entirely wiped out. Their remnants suffered such a devastating defeat that their king, whose name meant the slain, was slain in the subsequent chaos. The Alans suffered a similarly crushing blow, their forces shattered, and their leader killed in the final battles. This series of catastrophic defeats marked the end of their once looming presence across the western reaches of the empire, closing a chapter of the violent migrations that had reshaped the face of the continent. The remnants of this proud and resilient people faced a moment of crucial destiny. Instead of choosing a new king through traditional means, they boldly decided to relinquish their sovereignty and offered their crown to the Vandals' ruler, Gundhabaric. This act marked a significant turning point. From that moment onward, the Vandals and Alans would share a unified title, that of King of the Vandals and Alans. This was no ordinary merger of two tribes, it represented a strategic acquisition of a formidable military asset, the elite heavy cavalry of the Alans, which considerably strengthened the Vandals' armies. As the leader of this newly joined people, Gundhabaric advanced into new territories, driving back the tribes of the far northwest and beginning a series of conquests. His ambitions now turned southward, targeting the wealthy coastal cities of Boeotia. He succeeded in capturing the new Carthaginian stronghold, known as Cartagena, as well as Gispolis, that is, Seville, where the Vandals, for the first time in their history, seized ships and launched several daring pirate raids on the Balearic Islands. These assaults marked the first tentative steps toward future maritime dominance, though still in a limited scope. Gundhabaric's reign ended in the year that we refer to as 428, a moment that marked a turning point in his people's history. With his passing, authority passed into the hands of his stepbrother, a figure destined to become legendary, a genius, yet also a curse of his age. This new leader was named Gaiseric, and by then, he was already gazing across the strait towards another continent. Spain, in his eyes, was merely a strategic foothold, a staging ground for ambitions much greater than the peninsula itself. For Gaiseric, the true prize lay across the sea, beyond the horizon. Rarely does history move purely by faceless forces, more often, it is shaped by individuals whose will, ambitions, and genius irrevocably alter the course of events. In the saga of the Vandals, Gaiseric was undoubtedly such a figure. When he assumed power in 428, his people faced near destruction. Yet, almost half a century later, he transformed into the master of a maritime empire and became the most formidable enemy Rome had encountered. His rise was a tale of cold calculation, incredible daring, and a political intuition bordering on prophetic insight. Gaiseric was born out of wedlock. His father was King Gadagislas, but he was the son of a slave woman, a fact that would have been a profound obstacle for many. Yet, it proved to be inconsequential for him. He possessed an iron will and a sharp mind, qualities that overshadowed his physicality. Ancient sources describe him as a man of short stature, lame from a fall from his horse in youth, but this physical imperfection only emphasized his inner strength and resilience. Quiet and contemplative, he despised luxury and was quick-tempered, yet he was also capable of concealing his fury behind a mask of icy calm. His insatiable craving for wealth and power knew no bounds, and he was utterly merciless to his enemies. However, his foremost talent lay in his ability to discern the weaknesses of his adversaries and launch surprise attacks at the most unexpected moments. A master strategist in both battlefield tactics and diplomatic labyrinths, Gaiseric proved to be a visionary tactician. Upon ascending to the throne, Gaiseric carefully evaluated the precarious position of his people. The Vandals and Alans had established themselves in southern Spain, but their hold was fragile. Constant pressure from the Visigoths from the north threatened their existence, and Rome continually attempted to reclaim lost territories. Spain was effectively a trap, a sort of noose tightening around them. In a move that baffled many contemporaries, Gaiseric made a daring decision. He resolved to transport his entire people, comprising approximately 80,000 souls, including 15 to 20,000 warriors, across the Strait of Gibraltar into North Africa. This was an audacious plan, a gamble on an unprecedented scale. For the Romans, Africa represented the epitome of wealth and prosperity, synonymous with abundance and riches. The provinces of Africa Proconsularis, Numidia, and Mauritania served as vital granaries for the empire. Their storages overflowed with grain, olive oil, and wine, which flowed uninterrupted into Rome and Italy. Gaiseric's strategy was to reposition his entire kingdom into this resource-rich land, seizing the opportunity to turn the tide of history in a way that would forever alter the balance of power. The loss of Africa would have meant famine and an economic collapse for Rome itself. The province was of colossal importance, teeming with prosperous cities, luxurious villas owned by the aristocracy, and a wealth of resources that made it a vital part of the empire's stability. Most significantly, however, this region was poorly defended, leaving it exposed to threats that the empire had long since become unaccustomed to. Over the centuries of Roman peace and relative stability, the African provinces had largely forgotten the realities of serious warfare, which made any attempt at reclaiming or defending it a formidable challenge. But how could such a grand plan be carried out? How could an army of 80,000 people be transported across the sea? The question transformed into a complex political mystery, resembling a true detective story from the annals of history. One of the most widely accepted versions of events suggests that Gaiseric, the Vandal king, was personally invited to Africa by the Roman governor, Count Boniface. This episode stands as a classic example of the intrigue and treachery that contributed to the decline of the Western Roman Empire. Flavius Aetius, the supreme military commander of the West, and Boniface, the governor of Africa, were two of the most influential military leaders of their era, and, as history shows, fierce enemies. Aetius, reportedly fearing Boniface's rising power, allegedly sent him a false letter, warning that Empress Galla Placidia wanted to execute him, while simultaneously convincing the empress that Boniface was plotting a rebellion. Panicked by these false accusations, Boniface responded by inciting a rebellion of his own. To strengthen his position, he called upon the Vandals under Gaiseric, promising them land for settlement once they arrived, thus setting in motion a chain of events that would forever change the Western world. Historians continue to debate whether this invitation was genuine or merely a later invention created to explain the catastrophe. Regardless, Gaiseric needed only a pretext, and it's entirely possible that he himself had orchestrated the situation through his agents. Seeing an opportunity, he was determined not to let it slip away. By spring of the year 429, the Vandals began their great crossing. They assembled all available ships in the port of Julia Tr Disrupta, a modern harbor located at the tail end of the empire's African coast. Executing such a large-scale operation, moving 80,000 people, along with carts, livestock, and belongings, was a logistical nightmare that took several weeks to complete. Picture this scene: beneath the searing Spanish sun, thousands of barbarian warriors and northern tribesmen, those who had never before seen the African coast, were loading onto ships. They left behind their homeland, the land they had fought to defend for 20 long years, embarking into the unknown. It was an act born of desperation, yet driven by unshakable faith in their crippled king. As they disembarked in Mauritania, the Vandals set out eastward, heading towards the heart of Roman Africa, specifically the province of Proconsularis and its most renowned city, Carthage. Had Nenephaetius truly invited them, he would very soon come to regret it, for Gaiseric had no intention of acting as a pawn in anyone's game. He arrived not as an ally, but as a conqueror, eager to seize the territory by force. While the chaos in Ravenna and the internal Roman intrigue still played out, and before Boniface was able to reconcile with the empress, the Vandals advanced. It was already too late for Rome to prevent the invasion. The Roman African population, unaccustomed to war and unprepared for such an assault, panicked and retreated into the fortified cities. Gaiseric's march through the land was akin to a spreading wildfire, his warriors seasoned by decades of combat, relentless and merciless in their pursuit of victory. They showed no mercy, especially towards the Catholic clergy, who they saw as ideological enemies. In the year 430, the Vandals laid siege to one of the most significant cities of Numidia, Hippo Regius. The siege of this city became one of the most symbolic events of the era because within its walls was St. Augustine, the eminent Christian thinker who was approaching his final days. His presence underscored the gravity of the conflict. While the city was under threat, the spiritual voice of late antiquity was waiting for its end, symbolizing both the cultural richness and the impending upheaval sweeping across the region. He was the author of the treatise The City of God, in which he juxtaposed the earthly kingdoms with the eternal realm of heaven. Witnessing the crumbling of the Roman world before his eyes, he saw the once mighty empire of Rome dissolve into chaos and ruin. St. Augustine passed away during the third month of the siege, deeply absorbed in prayer within the walls of his library, walls that echoed with the thunderous blows of barbarian battering rams. His death amid the siege of Hippo became a poignant symbol marking the end of an entire epoch, the era of classical antiquity, shrouded by the shadow of barbarian invasions that swept across the lands. The siege itself lasted 14 months, a brutal ordeal that tested the resilience of the city and its inhabitants. The Vandals, lacking extensive experience in capturing large fortified cities, eventually withdrew, leaving behind a trail of destruction and devastation. However, their retreat was short-lived, as soon after, Boniface, reinforced with troops from Italy and the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople, launched a counterattack against Gaiseric. Once again, Boniface was decisively beaten in the field. That defeat sealed the fate of Africa for the Romans. Recognizing their dire situation, Boniface abandoned the continent to its conquerors. By the year 435, the exhausted and weakened Roman Empire was compelled to sign a peace treaty with Gaiseric. According to the terms of this agreement, the Vandals were officially granted control over the provinces of Mauritania and a portion of Numidia, restoring a semblance of independence and recognition as federates within the empire's framework. For Rome, this move was merely an attempt to buy time, to contain the barbarian threat and prevent immediate collapse. Yet, for Gaiseric, it was merely a temporary pause, a breathing space in his relentless pursuit of greater ambitions. His eye was fixed resolutely on the prize, the imperial heart of North Africa, the city of Carthage itself. He was gathering strength and awaiting his moment of decisive action. The very name Carthage alone sent ripples of fear through the Roman world, awakening ghosts of bygone battles, of Hannibal, of Punic Wars, of a centuries-long struggle for dominance over the Mediterranean basin. After the final destruction of Carthage in 1463 years before our era, Rome had rebuilt the city, transforming it into a shining jewel of its empire. The rebuilt Roman Carthage grew into a grand metropolis, rivaling only Rome, Constantinople, and Alexandria in size and wealth. It boasted a massive port, luxurious villas, baths, theaters, a circus, and crucially, warehouses that supplied grain to all of Italy. Carthage was the heart of the African provinces, a vital hub of commerce and power. And Gaiseric yearned to seize this heart for himself. When the treaty of year 435 was signed, a fragile lull settled over the region. Gaiseric used this quiet interval to strengthen his forces and study his opponent. He recognized that the Western Roman Empire was decaying from within, plagued by internal strife and weakness. Meanwhile, Aetius, who had defeated Boniface, was embroiled in campaigns against Visigoths and Franks in Gaul, leaving Rome's attention diverted elsewhere. Seizing this opportunity, Gaiseric launched a masterful strike, a move of cunning and meticulous planning, rooted in treachery. On the 19th of October, in the year 439, while the people of Carthage were entranced by chariot races in the city's circus, the Vandals' army approached the city gates and took them almost without resistance. The surprise was total, there was no warning of the impending assault. Gaiseric entered the capital of Africa not as a besieging force, but as a conqueror and undisputed ruler stepping into his prize. That day marked the official birth of the Vandal and Alanic kingdom. The fall of Carthage sent shockwaves through the Roman world, comparable perhaps only to the sack of Rome by the Visigoths in the year 410. Yet, the consequences were far graver. The Vandals did not merely plunder the city, they captured it entirely, with all its infrastructure, wealth, and resources. Most critically, they seized the great Carthaginian fleet and naval arsenals, transforming their status from a barbarian raiding band into a formidable maritime power. Overnight, a once humble Germanic tribe, whose origins traced back to the forests of Poland, emerged as the leading naval force in the western Mediterranean. Gaiseric swiftly set about constructing his new state, employing a model that was both ruthless and efficient. His vision was simple, yet brutal, establishing a kingdom rooted in maritime dominance and unrelenting might, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake as he forged a new barbarian empire in the heart of the ancient Mediterranean. The Vandals and Alans, who represented a mere insignificant minority, no more than 1 or 2% of the population, gradually transformed themselves into a ruling elite of warriors and landowners. Their leader, Gaiseric, confiscated vast tracts of land from the wealthiest Roman senators and magnates residing in the most fertile province of Proconsularis, surrounding Carthage. These confiscated estates, known as the Vandal allotments or latangs, were redistributed among his loyal soldiers. Importantly, these lands were granted immunity from taxation, providing the Vandals with economic security and a stronghold of support. Meanwhile, the remaining Roman inhabitants, despite losing political rights, continued their traditional crafts, engaged in trade, and maintained agricultural activities. However, now they paid taxes directly into the treasury of the Vandal king, marking a significant shift in their status. The existing Roman administrative system in the region was largely preserved, as the Vandals lacked trained personnel to manage complex economic affairs effectively. Nevertheless, the core of Vandal policy centered on a fierce religious confrontation. Gaiseric and his followers were devout Arians. For them, the Nicene or Catholic Christianity adhered to by the overwhelming majority of the Roman African population was not merely a different denomination but dangerous heresy, a direct symbol of Roman dominance and control. Immediately after capturing Carthage, targeted persecutions began. Catholic churches were seized and handed over to Arian clergy. Bishops and priests were expelled from their positions, and some were executed. The aristocracy suffered particularly, many were forced under duress to convert to Arianism in order to retain their estates and social standing. This policy produced a dual effect. On one hand, it unified the Vandals, making their faith a defining element of national identity and distinguishing them from the subdued local populace. On the other hand, it fostered ongoing internal tensions and divisions. The Roman Catholic Church in Africa, with its long tradition of martyrdom dating back to pagan persecutions, went underground and became a hub of passive resistance. Over the course of the entire century of Vandal rule, this religious schism remained an open sore and unresolved wound that ultimately contributed to the collapse of the kingdom. Having taken control of Carthage and established a firm base, Gaiseric launched a relentless assault with his newly built fleet against the remaining Roman territories. This marked the beginning of the era of Vandal piracy. Their ships, swift, agile, and formidable, dominated the Mediterranean Sea. In the year 440, they raided Sicily, a vital grain source for Rome after the loss of Africa. The empire was thrown into panic. Emperor Valentinian II was forced, by the year 442, to sign yet another humiliating treaty. Rome officially recognized the independent kingdom of the Vandals, ceding to them its most valuable provinces. In return, Gaiseric promised to resume grain shipments, now simply as a form of tribute paid by Rome to the Vandals, and even sent his son Guneric to the city of Ravenna as a hostage. Nevertheless, for Gaiseric, these treaties were merely scraps of parchment. His ambitions went far beyond diplomacy. He continued consolidating his naval empire, strengthening its grip across the western Mediterranean. In the subsequent years, the Vandals expanded their holdings further, conquering Sardinia, Corsica, and the Balearic Islands. Their fleet reigned supreme over the western Mediterranean basin, controlling all maritime traffic. Any vessel venturing towards Italy was at risk of being plundered. They transformed the sea, a body that the Romans had long called our sea, into what they increasingly referred to as the Vandal Sea. The Old World, with all its grand structures of power and culture, was crumbling under the weight of this new, bloody dawn. Rome, cut off from its most vital resources and lacking its former power, was slowly suffocating under the weight of its decline. Meanwhile, in Carthage, a crippled king of pirates was secretly amassing his forces, plotting a decisive strike against the Eternal City. Rome, a city revered as the heart of the world for over 1,000 years, had by the mid-5th century ceased to be its political capital. The imperial court had long since moved to a safer, more defensible plane, yet the city remained a powerful symbol, an idea embodied in marble and gold, serving as the center of the senatorial aristocracy and the focal point of Western Christianity. Throughout its 1,000-year history, Rome had fallen twice before, first in BC before Brennus and the Gauls, and again in AD, when Alaric and the Visigoths breached its defenses. However, what befell Rome in AD cast a shadow over its legacy so dark that it would be remembered for centuries to come, forever stained by the treacherous act of the Vandals. Before the catastrophe truly unfolded, a political upheaval set the stage for near destruction. In March of AD, the last emperor of the Theodosian dynasty on the western side, Valentinian II, was murdered in a conspiracy. His death was driven by revenge. He had personally stabbed Flavius Aetius, his trusted general and the last Roman to defeat the Huns at Chalons. Striking down two pillars of the crumbling empire, the murder plunged the city into chaos. An ambitious senator named Petronius Maximus seized power, but to legitimize his rule, he forced Valentinian's widow, Licinia Eudoxia, to marry him. Here, history and myth intertwine once again. Most sources tell of how, humiliated and driven by rage, Eudoxia secretly sent a plea to Carthage, appealing to the king Gaiseric to come and avenge her husband's death. She supposedly promised him the treasures of the imperial palace as a reward. Gaiseric, a man whose ambitions matched his cunning, saw this as an ideal opportunity. The treaty signed in AD had already linked his interests with the imperial family. Valentinian's son, Gaiseric's betrothed, was engaged to the emperor's daughter. Valentinian's murder provided a pretext, a moral justification, for Gaiseric to act. Whether Eudoxia's plea was genuine or manipulated, it supplied Gaiseric with a perfect moral cover for his invasion. By late May of that year, a formidable Vandal fleet had arrived at the mouth of the Tiber River, anchoring at Ostia. Panic quickly spread through the city. Petronius Maximus, instead of organizing a proper defense, tried to flee while the chaos was still manageable, but he was swiftly torn apart by an enraged crowd. The city was left defenseless, deprived of leadership and protection. At this critical moment, an iconic figure of the era emerged, Pope Leo the Great. Known for his earlier role in convincing Attila the Hun not to destroy Rome, Leo now faced another crisis. Lacking any military means, he bravely went out to meet Gaiseric, reportedly pleading with him to spare the city and its inhabitants from destruction and slaughter. Unlike Attila, Gaiseric was a Christian, albeit in Arians, and perhaps this, along with the Pope's courageous intervention, influenced his decisions. It's possible that the king recognized the greater value in thorough plunder over indiscriminate violence. Gaiseric gave his word of honor, and, generally true to his promise, he partly restrained his troops. The Vandals entered Rome through the Ostian gates, and a looting unprecedented in history commenced. The pillage lasted for approximately 2 weeks, but it was not the reckless destruction of uncontrolled rage that characterized earlier barbarian invasions. Instead, it was a calculated, organized operation, a systematic plundering aimed at stripping the city of its riches. The Vandals seized everything of value, targeting statues, treasures, gold, and artworks, turning the city into a treasure trove. The destruction was meticulous and deliberate, reflecting a particular intent rather than mindless fury, making this conquest uniquely devastating in its methodical nature. Special detachments regularly conducted systematic raids on the imperial palaces situated on the Palatine Hill, as well as on temples, villas, and residences of the aristocracy. These groups would seize everything of value: gold, silver, precious gemstones, exquisite furniture, artworks, and fine silk fabrics. One of their most audacious acts involved stripping the roof of the Jupiter Capitolinus Temple, the chief sanctuary of ancient Rome, of its gilded bronze tiles. However, among the treasures looted by the Vandals, the most renowned and historically significant were those transported by the Emperor Titus from the destroyed Jerusalem Temple in 70 AD. Among these relics was the legendary menorah, a 7-branched gold candelabrum, sacred vessels, and the tables used for offering bread. These sacred artifacts, which had been preserved in the Roman Temple of Peace for centuries, were loaded onto Vandal ships and set sail across the Mediterranean. Their journey from Jerusalem to Rome, and subsequently from Rome to Carthage, became one of the most extraordinary voyages in the history of sacred relics, full of drama and intrigue. Gaiseric, the king of the Vandals, was not merely a looter, he also forcibly removed people. Thousands of skilled artisans, jewelers, armorers, weavers, shipbuilders were captured and transported to Carthage, where they were forced into slavery to help build and sustain the economic prosperity of the Vandal kingdom. Yet, the most prized captives of all were women of the imperial family. Gaiseric took with him Empress Evdoxia, the widow of Valentinian III, along with her 2 daughters, Eudocia and Placidia. Upon reaching Carthage, Gaiseric immediately arranged for his son Huneric to marry Eudocia, thereby creating a dynastic alliance with the imperial Farnese family of Theodosius, which granted him a vaunted but formal right to meddle in imperial affairs. When, just 2 weeks later, the Vandals set sail from Ostia with their ships laden to capacity with treasures, Rome lay devastated. The city itself was not burned, and mass slaughter was avoided. Nonetheless, it was deeply humiliated and stripped of its wealth. The city had been robbed, its pride wounded, and its economic foundation shattered. This plunder of the year 455 represented a severe blow to the prestige and resources of the Western Roman Empire, marking the definitive erosion of its vitality. In the meantime, Gaiseric's power reached its zenith. He did not merely loot Rome, he demonstrated to the entire world who now commanded dominance over the Western Mediterranean. His kingdom in Africa, heavily financed by Roman gold and staffed by Roman artisans, was entering what would become its golden age. Meanwhile, the specter of Vandal ships loomed ominously over the entire coastline, from Gibraltar to Greece. Anyone daring to challenge their supremacy had to remember the fate of that eternal city. The humiliation inflicted in 455 could not be left unanswered. Even as the Western Roman Empire teetered on the brink of collapse, ravaged internally by discord and besieged externally by barbarian invasions, it could barely reconcile itself with the existence of this pirate state that held its life-saving artery. To the east, in the mighty and still thriving city of Constantinople, the Vandals were viewed not only as a threat to maritime trade but also as heretics, cruel oppressors of Orthodox Christianity. Sooner or later, the empire was compelled to muster all its strength for a decisive assault. And indeed, it launched such efforts twice. However, both times they ended in catastrophic failure. The first significant attempt was undertaken by one of the last prominent Western emperors, Majorian. Ascending the throne in the year 457, he was a vigorous and proactive ruler who aimed to restore Roman authority over the lost provinces. Over the course of several years, he meticulously brought order and stability to the regions of Gaul and Spain. His ultimate ambition, however, was to extend his influence across the vast African continent. By the year 406, he had assembled an enormous fleet of more than 300 ships at the port of New Carthage, located along the Spanish coast. Along with this formidable navy, he had gathered a powerful army, all fully prepared for an invasion of Africa. Yet, once again, Gaiseric proved himself to be a master strategist. Instead of waiting passively for the Roman fleet to establish a landing in Africa, he relied on his intelligence network to gather precise information about the position and plans of the enemy's naval forces. Armed with this knowledge, he struck preemptively, launching a surprise attack. By employing the element of suddenness, possibly aided by betrayal within the Roman camp, the Vandal fleet under Gaiseric's direct command stormed into the harbor and swiftly annihilated the Roman fleet stationed there. As a result, the Roman general Marin, who had been left without his navy, suffered a devastating defeat even before the actual battle could commence. Not long afterward, Marin was overthrown and murdered. His initial desperate attempt to retaliate ended in disgrace. The most ambitious, yet ultimately catastrophic, military operation against the Vandals was launched 8 years later. This was a joint effort involving both halves of the divided Roman Empire. The Eastern Emperor Leo I, driven by pleas for assistance from the Western court and eager to eradicate the Arian threat once and for all, decided to organize the most extensive naval expedition since antiquity. The expenses for this colossal campaign were enormous. The Byzantine historian Procopius of Caesarea records that the fleet was built at a cost of around 130,000 pounds of gold, approximately 65 metric tons, funds that nearly drained the treasury of the Eastern Empire. An armada of more than 100 ships was assembled, carrying roughly 100,000 soldiers and sailors on board. This formidable force seemed capable of crushing any opposition in its path. The command of this enormous fleet was entrusted to the Emperor Leo's trusted admiral, the eunuch Vasilius Shurin. The invasion plan was carefully worked out. The main fleet, under Vasilius's leadership, was to land near Carthage. Simultaneously, a second army commanded by the general Heraclius was to advance overland from Egypt through Tripolitania. A third force, led by the Western Roman commander Marcellinus, was tasked with recapturing Sardinia to join the main fleet in the confrontation. Initially, events proceeded according to plan. Marcellinus successfully secured control over Sardinia, while Heraclius advanced along the Libyan coast. The primary fleet under Vasilius crossed the sea safely and anchored at Mount Bon, only about 60 kilometers from Carthage. Gaiseric, however, was plunged into panic. His forces were vastly outnumbered and poorly equipped, making him believe that his kingdom was doomed. Nevertheless, he once again resorted to his favorite tactic, deception. He sent envoys to Vasilius, pretending to be willing to surrender. He requested only a 5-day delay, claiming it was necessary to negotiate the terms of capitulation. Vasilius, confident and perhaps even bribed according to some sources, made a critical mistake. Instead of launching an immediate attack on the undefended city of Carthage, he agreed to a truce. During those 5 days, Gaiseric exploited the opportunity to prepare his trap to perfection. He kept his plans secretly outfitting dozens of his older ships with combustible materials, dry wood, tar, and oil, transforming them into floating fire traps ready to unleash destruction. The vessels used in this daring attack were known as brenners, a type of incendiary ships designed specifically for destruction. One night, driven by a strong, head-on wind that favored their assault against the Roman fleet, a group of Vandals launched their daring offensive under cover of darkness. Their entire flotilla quietly slipped out into the open sea, cloaked in shadows. Leading the assault were the incendiary ships, carefully set ablaze and directed straight toward the densely anchored Roman ships lying in the harbor. As they drew nearer, chaos erupted. The Vandals unleashed their fiery wrath, and what ensued was nothing short of apocalyptic. Flames spread with terrifying speed, leaping from one wooden vessel to another, engulfing entire fleets in an inferno. The ships, all made of dry, pitch-covered wood, turned into blazing pyres, devouring everything in their path. In the pitch-black night sky, the screams of thousands of sailors trapped and burned alive or overwhelmed by rising waters echoed wildly, creating a cacophony of terror and despair. Panicking crews desperately tried to detach their ships, but the chaos, combined with the crowded conditions, made escape nearly impossible. Any vessel that attempted to break free was swiftly targeted by the Vandals' main fleet, which followed behind the burning benders, attacking and sinking those fleeing ships. Observing the catastrophic destruction unfolding before their eyes, Vasilius, the Roman commander, quickly retreated to his flagship to escape the inferno. By dawn, only about half of what was once the greatest fleet ever assembled in the Mediterranean remained. The other half had been consumed by flames or had fallen into enemy hands. The disaster was total and devastating. The Roman Empire lost not only its navy and military strength but also immense financial resources and, most importantly, a crucial blow to its morale and sense of invincibility. The repercussions of this defeat at Cape Bon proved fatal, especially for the Western Roman Empire. Stripped of any remaining hope for aid from the East, its fate was sealed. The Western Roman Empire was now doomed to collapse. 18 years later, in 476, the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was formally deposed, marking traditionally the end of antiquity's Roman era. Meanwhile, Gaiseric had become the undisputed and absolute master of the seas. By 474, Constantinople was forced to sign a perpetual peace treaty with him, recognizing all his territorial conquests, a testament to his dominion. The old, lame king, who had begun his journey as the leader of desperate refugees, had lived to see both Roman empires acknowledge his sovereignty, elevating him to an equal standing with the emperors. His kingdom appeared unassailable, seemingly immortal. The shadow of his founder, a legendary figure, served as both a blessing and a curse for his descendants. Gaiseric had forged his realm through the cunning of his genius, but he failed to pass down that same brilliance to his heirs. After his death in 477, in the depths of old age, the kingdom of the Vandals and Alans entered a long, nearly 60-year period known as the twilight of the Vandal kingdom. This epoch was marked by palace intrigues, brutal religious persecutions, episodes of false stability, and a slow erosion of the military strength that once made the Vandals dominant over the Mediterranean. According to the succession law established by Gaiseric, the crown was to be inherited not solely from father to son, but by the eldest male of the royal line. This system, designed to ensure experienced leadership at all times, instead bred bloody power struggles among various branches of the dynasty. The first heir was Gaiseric's son, Huneric, who ruled from 477 to 480. He inherited his father's cruelty but not his strategic brilliance. Huneric's reign became infamous for the most ruthless persecutions of the Catholic population, with some historians interpreting his actions as the twisted embodiment of fanaticism. If Gaiseric had attacked Catholics for political reasons, Huneric seemed driven by a sadistic fervor, acting with the relentless zeal of a fanatic whose own cruelty surpassed mere political motives. Throughout his reign, he was responsible for closing the remaining churches, confiscating their property, and dispatching thousands of people into exile or outright execution. The apex of his brutal policies culminated in the council held in the year 484, where he summoned Catholic bishops and demanded they convert to Arianism. When they refused, he unleashed a wave of terror upon them that is vividly detailed in Bishop Victor Wojtyński's historical account of persecutions. According to eyewitness testimony, torture was inflicted, tongues were cut out, and right arms were severed, yet astonishingly, many of the victims continued to speak and preach freely, as if by some miracle. His rule, though brief, left a lasting stain, souring relationships between the Vandals and their Roman subjects and earning him the grim reputation of a relentless persecutor. Following his death, the throne was inherited by his nephew, Gunthamund, who reigned from 484 until 496. In stark contrast to his uncle, Gunthamund understood that relentless cruelty only weakened the kingdom. Recognizing the destructive nature of his predecessor's policies, he swiftly put an end to the persecutions. Under his leadership, Catholics were permitted to return from exile, their churches to be reopened, and a new bishop of Carthage to be elected. This period marked a relative lull in hostilities, allowing the kingdom to experience a time of stability and economic revival. The economy, heavily reliant on African agriculture and maritime trade, functioned with a steady rhythm, fostering a sense of cautious optimism. However, despite this outward semblance of stability, the Vandals began to show signs of internal decay, particularly in their military strength. Their warriors, descendants of those who had crossed the Rhine generations earlier, increasingly immersed themselves in the opulence reminiscent of Roman aristocratic life. They had transformed from fierce fighters into wealthy planters, living on lavish villas and indulging in luxury. Meanwhile, at the southern borders of the Vandal realm, pressure-mounted Berber tribes grew bolder, launching more daring raids that threatened to destabilize the fragile peace. The next ruler to ascend the Vandal throne was Trasimund, the brother of Gunthamund, who reigned from the year 496 until 523. Trasimund was renowned for his education and refinement, a ruler who valued arts and theology over brute force. Instead of resorting to violence, he preferred persuasion and diplomatic negotiations. While he refrained from renewing bloody persecutions, he sought to convert Catholic subjects to Arianism by offering financial benefits, positions of authority, and social prestige. Engaging in theological debates, he often hosted scholars at the royal court, fostering an environment of intellectual discussion. His foreign policy aimed at forging alliances with neighboring Germanic kingdoms. To this end, he married Amalafrida, sister of the powerful Ostrogothic king Theodoric the Great, who ruled over Italy. This union cemented a political and religious axis, briefly stabilizing the region under an Arian-dominated political framework. Yet, even amid this relative peace, challenges persisted. Most notably, the Vandals lost complete control over the region of Tripolitania, and attacks by Berber tribes intensified into a serious threat that the waning Vandal army was no longer capable of resisting effectively. The combination of growing luxury, complacency, and peaceful living sapped their warrior spirit, making them increasingly vulnerable to external assaults. Upon Thrasymun's death, the throne passed to his cousin, Hilderich, who ruled from 523 until 530. Hilderich was the son of Guneric and the Roman princess Eudocia. His accession marked a definitive shift in the kingdom's political orientation. Raised largely by his mother, Hilderich was, in essence, a Roman at heart. He held Catholic faith strongly and completely ceased all pressure against the Orthodox Church. Moreover, he broke the alliance with the Ostrogoths, turning his attention toward the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. He regarded Emperor Justinian as his protector and sought closer ties with the imperial court in Constantinople, signaling a shift in diplomatic orientation that would influence the future of the Vandal kingdom. For the Vandalar aristocracy, whose identity had long been rooted in Arianism and anti-Roman sentiments, such a shift in policy was regarded almost as a betrayal. Their discontent deepened in the face of military setbacks, especially after their forces suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of the Berbers. The patience that their ruling elite had gently harbored for so long finally snapped. In the year of 530, they rose in rebellion against their monarch. The incumbent king, Hilderich, was overthrown and thrown into captivity. In his place, his cousin and nephew, Gelimer, was proclaimed king and heir descended from Gaiseric, who had ruled from 525 to 529. Gelimer was a staunch traditionalist, fiercely loyal to Arianism, and strongly nationalistic. His first act as ruler was to rekindle the anti-Catholic policies of the past and sever all diplomatic ties with Constantinople. He aspired to restore the glorious days of Gaiseric's reign and bring the kingdom back to its former prominence. However, Gelimer underestimated one crucial truth: times had irrevocably changed. No longer was the Roman emperor an aging Justin, but a young and ambitious successor, Justinian, who sat upon the throne in Constantinople. The overthrow of Hilderich, a pro-Byzantine ruler, provided Justinian with a golden opportunity for intervention, an opportunity he had awaited longingly to launch his grand vision of restoring the Roman Empire's former grandeur. The last king of the Vandals, without intending it, had in fact sealed his kingdom's doom. In the splendidly rebuilt city of Constantinople, located on the shining shores of the Bosphorus, the young Emperor Justinian dreamed of reviving imperial glory. He saw himself not merely as the ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire but as its rightful heir, the legitimate successor of Caesar, destined to reconquer the lost territories of the West and reassert Roman dominance across the continent. His reign had begun with the suppression of the massive Nika revolt, a revolt that nearly resulted in his overthrow. Having stabilized his rule, Justinian's attention shifted westward, and his first target in his ambitious imperial restoration was the kingdom of the Vandals. The coup orchestrated by Gelimer providentially gave him a fitting pretext for war. Justinian declared that he was not fighting against the Vandal people, but against a usurper, a dictator who had unlawfully dethroned the true king and who threatened the stability of the entire region. Many courtiers in Justinian's court considered the African campaign to be madness, especially given the recent memories of the disastrous events of 468. Yet, the emperor possessed a key advantage: a brilliant general unlike the incompetent Basiliscus. His name was Belisarius, a man of humble origins who had risen to greatness through talent and perseverance. Belisarius was cautious and methodical, beloved by his soldiers, and possessed a rare gift for making sound decisions amid the chaos of battle. It was to him that Justinian entrusted the command of the expedition. In the summer of 533, the Byzantine fleet, comprising 500 transport ships and 92 warships, set sail from Constantinople. On board was a relatively small yet highly professional army of approximately 10,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry, with the core consisting of the elite Bucellarii of Belisarius himself. Meanwhile, King Gelimer made two critical strategic errors. First, a pro-Byzantine uprising erupted in Tripolitania, and he failed to recognize its significance. Second, and far more disastrous, an insurrection arose in Sardinia, led by the Gotad. Instead of preparing for the anticipated Byzantine assault, Gelimer sent the best troops from his army and the entire fleet, commanded by his brother, Zazan, to quell the rebellion on Sardinia. These miscalculations left him vulnerable, setting the stage for a decisive confrontation that would determine the fate of his kingdom and serve as the opening chapter of Justinian's grand effort to restore the imperial Roman dominion across the western Mediterranean. In the aftermath of the naval victory, when Belisarius's fleet anchored off the coast of Africa in September of the year 533, no obstacles or opposition impeded his landing. The general was able to disembark unchallenged on the shores of what is now modern Tunisia, situated away from the major city of Carthage, and he immediately issued strict orders to his troops to uphold the highest discipline. Recognizing the value of showing mercy and restraint, Belisarius instructed his men to settle accounts with the local population through fair exchanges for provisions, rather than brutal plunder. This strategic choice aimed to create a favorable impression. He sought not to be seen as a ruthless conqueror but rather as a liberator who brought hope. Such an approach proved effective. The Romanized inhabitants, wearied and exhausted by years of Vandal rule and religious oppression, greeted the Byzantine forces with surprising warmth and joy. When King Gelimer learned of the landings, he was filled with fury. His first instinct was to eliminate the prisoner in his custody, the captured Hilderich, ordering his execution without delay. Subsequently, Gelimer devised a plan to lure Belisarius into an ambush, aiming to decisively defeat him. The trap was set around the rocky outcrop called Ad Decimum, meaning the 10th mile, located along the route from the coast to Carthage. The plan was intricate. Gelimer's brother Amata was tasked with attacking the vanguard of Belisarius's army, while his nephew Gibamund was to strike from the flank, and Gelimer himself was to engage the main Byzantine forces from behind, attacking their rear. On the 13th of September, in the year 533, the two armies clashed at Ad Decimum. The Vandals' overconfidence and poor coordination quickly became their downfall. Amata launched his attack prematurely and was swiftly overwhelmed and slain by Belisarius's vanguard. Meanwhile, Gibamund's detachment was entirely annihilated by a powerful squadron of Gothic cavalry allied with the Byzantines. As the main Vandal force under Gelimer pressed forward with confidence, it seemed the tide was turning in their favor, and victory was close at hand. Yet, upon witnessing the lifeless body of his brother sprawled on the battlefield, Gelimer was overcome with despair. Instead of pressing the attack, he was consumed by grief, losing invaluable time to rally his forces and pursue further combat. Belisarius seized the moment to regroup his troops and struck back with renewed strength, launching a decisive counterattack that shattered the disorganized Vandal army. The path to Carthage was now open and clear. In only 2 days, on the 15th of September, Belisarius entered the city triumphantly, a feat of which few in the empire could boast. The defenders opened their gates willingly, and he entered the city that the Romans had lost nearly a century earlier. Belisarius then took possession of the throne of Gelimer, occupying it and dining on the very dishes prepared for the defeated king of the Vandals. However, the conflict was far from over. Gelimer managed to escape the city and fled into the rugged terrain of Numidia. There, receiving aid from his brother Cassin and a force from Sardinia, he gathered the remaining remnants of his army and prepared for a renewed fight. The decisive confrontation occurred around mid-December near a small settlement called Tricomerum. This time, the Vandals fought with the desperation of those who see no hope of victory, fighting as if their very existence depended on this final stand. Yet, once again, Belisarius's cavalry, led personally by the general himself, proved superior. During the chaos of the battle, Cassin was killed while fighting valiantly, and Gelimer succumbed to despair, fleeing the battlefield in disgrace. Witnessing their king's flight, the Vandals' army disintegrated into chaos and retreat. Following this defeat, Gelimer sought refuge in the mountains of Numidia, where loyal Berber tribes protected him. But after months of blockade, suffering from hunger and the harsh cold, he finally surrendered to Belisarius. The kingdom of the Vandals and Alans was effectively abolished, its former rulers overthrown and its sovereignty extinguished. Belisarius returned to Constantinople with a triumphant procession unmatched since the days of the Roman Republic itself. In the imperial city, Emperor Justinian's court examined the captured Gelimer and his family, parading them before witnesses. The treasury was overflowing with the vast riches accumulated by the Vandal kings over centuries of plunder and raiding, treasures that included not only gold and gemstones but also sacred relics. Among them were sacred objects from the Jerusalem temple, a menorah, and vessels of religious significance, preserved through the ages and now falling into Byzantine hands. These acquisitions symbolized not only a military victory but also the triumph of the empire's spiritual and cultural influence over the once cherished lands of the Vandals. Following the advice of the Jewish community, Justinian ordered their return to Jerusalem, where their traces were ultimately lost without a chance of further trace or record. The last king of the Vandals, Glycerius, faced the emperor with unwavering courage and composure. He did not display any sign of fear. Instead, he quietly echoed a verse from the book of Ecclesiastes, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." His life was spared, and he was exiled in honor to a remote province in Gaul, where he spent his remaining days in noble confinement. This marked the end of not only his personal story but also that of his entire people. In a mere 6 months, a kingdom that had been meticulously built over nearly 1.5 centuries, one that challenged both Roman empires and commanded vast maritime dominions, disappeared as if it were a mirage in the African desert. Its fall was as swift and staggering as its rise had been meteoric. But what were the underlying reasons behind the collapse of a state that once seemed so powerful? The explanation was multifaceted, with all factors tangled together into an impenetrable web of causes. Firstly, the Vandals, despite their prominent achievements, always remained outsiders in the African land they conquered. Their numbers were relatively small, no more than 100,000 warriors, compared to the millions of Latin and Berber inhabitants who had long inhabited the region. This demographic disparity created a persistent sense of alienation. The Vandals either failed or refused to integrate fully with the local population. Instead, they established a rigid social system reminiscent of apartheid, where the Vandalarians were considered the elite first-class citizens, while the Roman Catholics lay in a subordinate position. Such a hierarchical division fostered resentment and division within the population, making stability difficult to sustain. Secondly, the tragic turning point was rooted in relentless religious intolerance. The Vandals' harsh persecutions of the Catholic community ignited widespread internal resistance. Their brutality only deepened the divide, creating a fierce front of opposition that would prove difficult to contain. When the Byzantines, along with their aligned Roman Catholic allies, finally arrived to reconquer the territory, the local inhabitants saw them not as conquerors, but as liberators. This perception played a vital role in facilitating the relatively easy passage of the Byzantine general Belisarius and his forces across North Africa. The oppressed populace welcomed the Byzantines as deliverers, which significantly hastened their campaign. Thirdly, after roughly a century of peaceful and prosperous rule amid the fertile lands of North Africa, the Vandals gradually lost their martial spirit. Descendants of fierce warriors, who once stormed the gates of Rome and held vast territories, devolved into a pampered aristocracy, more concerned with luxury than defense. Their military declined in strength and discipline, and ultimately, in times of crisis, the Vandal army proved incapable of resisting the highly trained, professional troops of Belisarius. This vulnerability was nothing short of fatal. What, then, became of the Vandal people? Their fate was tragic and almost tragic in its finality. The most capable warriors were drafted into the Byzantine army and sent to serve on the Eastern Front against Persia, where many of them perished in battle. The remaining men were sold into slavery, their communities shattered. Women, on the other hand, were integrated into Byzantine households through marriage, losing their cultural identity. Within a single or 2 generations, the Vandals as a distinct ethnic group had completely disappeared, destined to vanish from history without leaving behind language, arts, or archaeological traces, save for a few remains of Arian chapels and some characteristic fibulae. Their extinction was absolute and total. Soon after, Africa was reabsorbed into the Roman Empire, but the continent that emerged was no longer the vibrant, lively province it had once been. The century of Vandal rule, coupled with subsequent campaigns involving Berber tribes, had severely undermined its economy and stability. Not long after, a weakened Byzantine Africa would become an easy target for new invaders originating from the sands of Arabia, under the banner of Islam, radically transforming the region once more. So, what legacy did the Vandals leave behind? Primarily, their name became eternally associated with destruction and desecration, most notably through the word vandalism. The term was first used in 1894 by Abbot Gregoire during the French Revolution, who drew a comparison between the revolutionary destruction of artworks and the infamous sacking of Rome by the Vandals in 455. This comparison cemented the reputation of the Vandals as symbols of barbarism, overshadowing the complex, often tragic history of their civilization. The story of the Vandal Kingdom is not merely a tale of barbarians and ruin, it is a chapter of history rich with intricacies, contradictions, and profound lessons about the rise and fall of great peoples. This powerful reminder highlights the fragile nature of civilization and how swiftly the course of history can change. It tells the story of a people who, driven by desperation, crossed an entire continent to forge a vast maritime empire, an empire that dared to challenge the very authority of Rome itself. Their ambitious endeavors ultimately led to their complete eradication from the pages of history, leaving behind only a cursed name and an enduring question: does a vanished civilization disappear entirely, or does its echo continue to resonate through the ages? As centuries pass, the echoes of this once great nation seem to reverberate faintly amid the whispering sands that cover the ruins of majestic Carthage, serving as a stark reminder of the fleeting nature of power and glory. It is a sobering reflection that even the most formidable kingdoms and empires, no matter how mighty they appear in their time, are but fleeting notes in the grand symphony of history, nothing more than fleeting songs swayed by the winds of time. Their stories fade into silence, yet the traces they leave behind remain etched into the landscape, whispering their tales to those willing to listen. Thank you for accompanying us on this extensive journey into the depths of forgotten history. If this story has resonated with you, we invite you to explore further, to continue seeking the lessons embedded within the ruins of bygone eras. The stream of stories yet to be told is endless, and many remain hidden beneath the sands of time, waiting to be uncovered. Until we meet again in future tales, may history's silent whispers continue to inspire and remind us of our fragile existence.